The small room was silent, except for the weak, painful breathing of Martha Williams. The air was thick with the scent of sickness, a mixture of damp clothes, old medicine, and unwashed sheets. She lay on a thin mattress, her frail body barely covered by a faded blanket. Her skin, once full of life, had turned pale. Her lips were dry and cracked. She looked like a shadow of the strong woman she used to be. Hello, family. Welcome to Storytime Mutually. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel, like, and share this video to your friends and loved ones. Don't forget to turn on post notifications for more videos. Thank you as you do so. Sit back, relax as we dive into the story. Beside her, Stella knelt on the cold floor, holding her mother's thin hands. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She had to be strong. If she broke down, who would fight for them? "Mama, please, try to eat something," Stella pleaded, lifting a spoonful of rice to her mother's lips. Martha weakly shook her head. "I'm not hungry," she whispered.
It was a lie.
Stella knew it. Her mother wasn't refusing food because she wasn't hungry. She was refusing because she knew there wasn't enough. For months, they had been barely surviving. Their tiny one-room apartment was falling apart, with cracks in the walls and a leaking roof. The landlord had already threatened to throw them out because they couldn't pay rent. Stella worked day and night, doing menial jobs, cleaning people's houses, washing clothes for strangers, and sometimes standing by the roadside, hoping someone would hire her for a day's work. But it was never enough. And then her mother fell sick. At first, it was just mild dizziness and a persistent cough. They ignored it, hoping it would go away. But it only got worse. Soon, Martha could barely stand. The pain in her chest became unbearable. Stella had rushed her to a small clinic, praying that the doctor would offer help. But the moment he saw Martha, his face changed. "Your mother has a severe heart condition," the doctor had said, adjusting his glasses. "She needs urgent surgery." The words had hit Stella like a hammer. "How much does it cost?" she had asked, her voice shaking. The doctor sighed. "At least 10 million naira for the surgery and medications." 10 million? It might as well have been 100 million, because Stella didn't even have 10,000 naira. She had begged the doctor, begged like a child, but he only gave her painkillers and told her to come back when she had the money. Days turned into weeks, and her mother only got worse. Stella went everywhere, begging for help. She visited churches, hoping the pastors would assist her. Some prayed for her, others gave her words of encouragement, but none gave her the money she needed. She tried calling distant relatives, people who once claimed to love her mother. "Stella, times are hard," they all said. "We don't have anything to spare." Even their neighbors, people they had known for years, turned their backs on them. One afternoon, after another failed attempt at getting help, Stella returned home to find her mother lying still on the bed, barely breathing. Panic gripped her. Mama, talk to me." She shook her lightly. Martha opened her eyes slightly. "Don't cry, my child," she whispered. If I don't make it, just know that I love you." Something inside Stella broke. She ran out of the house, down the street, her vision blurred with tears. She was losing her mother, and there was nothing she could do. That was when she saw Linda, her childhood friend. Linda was just coming out of a restaurant, looking well-fed and happy. Stella almost felt ashamed of how thin and exhausted she looked compared to her friend. Linda's face changed when she saw Stella's tear-streaked face. "Stella, what's wrong?" she asked. Stella told her everything. About her mother's condition. About the 10 million naira. About how nobody was willing to help. Linda sighed, hesitating. Then, she lowered her voice. "There's someone who can help you. Nicholas Cain." Stella frowned. Nicholas Cain? She had heard of him. A billionaire. A powerful man. A ruthless businessman. He helps people, but Linda hesitated again. His help doesn't come free. Sometimes he asks for something difficult. Stella's chest tightened. She knew exactly what Linda meant. "You mean he asks for a woman's body?" Stella whispered. Linda looked away. "Not always, but sometimes." Stella clenched her fists. How could she even consider such a thing? I can't, she said. I can't do that. Linda shrugged. Then find another way to save your mother. Those words haunted Stella for the rest of the day. That night, as she sat beside her mother, watching her struggle to breathe, her heart felt like it was being ripped apart. She thought about all the people who had refused to help. She thought about how the world was so cruel to the poor. Then she thought about Nicholas Cain. Mama, she whispered, gripping her mother's hand. I'll save you, no matter what. The next morning, she made her decision. She would go to Nicholas Cain. She had no idea what awaited her. With her heart pounding like a drum, Stella stood in front of the grand iron gates of Nicholas Cain's mansion. The sheer size of the estate made her feel even smaller than she already did. The mansion was magnificent, standing tall like a palace, surrounded by perfectly trimmed gardens and a long driveway paved with marble stones. Everything about this place screamed power, wealth, intimidation. She hesitated. Was this a mistake? Her hands trembled as she reached for the intercom and pressed the button. Her stomach twisted in knots. Seconds later, a deep voice came through the speaker. Who are you? She swallowed hard. I need to see Mr. Nicholas Cain. Please, it's urgent. There was a pause. Then the gates buzzed open, slowly revealing the long path leading to the main house. With shaky legs, Stella stepped inside. A butler led her through the lavish mansion, gold chandeliers, velvet curtains, floors so polished she could see her reflection. It was another world. When they reached a massive office, the butler gestured for her to go inside. Mr. Cain will see you now. Stella took a deep breath and stepped in. And there he was, Nicholas Cain, the billionaire, the untouchable businessman, the man who could change her life in an instant. He sat behind an expensive mahogany desk, dressed in a sharp black suit, his presence so overwhelming that Stella felt the air leave her lungs. His face was cold, unreadable, dangerously handsome, his dark eyes staring straight through her, as if he could see every thought in her mind. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. If you don't start talking, his deep voice cut through the silence, I'll assume you wasted my time. Stella flinched. Even his voice carried authority. She struggled, forcing herself to speak. I need your help. His eyes didn't waver. I don't do charity. Her throat tightened. It's my mother, she's dying. She needs urgent surgery, but I don't have the money. Nicholas leaned back in his chair, watching her with a sharp, calculating gaze. Then, after a long silence, he chuckled. Let me guess. You came here because you heard I help people for a price. Stella's heart stopped. She lowered her eyes, ashamed. I'll do anything, she whispered. Just please. Nicholas stood up, slowly walking toward her. She felt her body tense as he came close, towering over her, his presence suffocating. Anything, he repeated. Stella swallowed. Yes. He reached out and tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. Then here's my offer, Stella. I'll give you the money, but in return, for 2 months you belong to me. Her breath caught in her throat. What? 2 months, he repeated, his voice dangerously low. You'll stay in my house. You'll do what I say, when I say it. His eyes darkened. And you'll share my bed. Stella's body went cold. No. Nicholas raised an eyebrow. No. I can't, she whispered. I'm a virgin. For the first time, Nicholas looked surprised. But the shock vanished quickly, replaced by mocking amusement. How sweet, he murmured. You want to save yourself for your husband? Stella's hands clenched into fists. She refused to be humiliated. Ask me for anything else, she said, her voice shaking. I'll work for you. I'll be your maid. No. Nicholas cut her off, his expression turning cold again. This is my price. Take it or leave it. Tears burned in her eyes. I can't do this, she whispered. Nicholas shrugged. Then leave. His words hit her like a slap. She stared at him, waiting, hoping he would change his mind, that he would show mercy, but his face remained emotionless. He doesn't care. With a broken heart, Stella turned and ran out of the mansion. She rushed home, her chest tight, her soul drowning in pain. Her mother was still in bed, looking weaker than ever. Sweat covered her forehead, her breath shallow. "Stella," Martha's voice was barely a whisper. "Did you find help?" Stella couldn't speak. She forced a smile.
"A lie."
"Yes, Mama," she whispered, holding her mother's hand. "I'll find a way." But that way no longer existed. That night, as she lay beside her mother, she listened to her weak heartbeat. And she knew, if she didn't do something soon, her mother would die. And so, the next morning, Stella made the hardest decision of her life. She went back to Nicholas Cain. "I accept," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Nicholas didn't even look surprised. "Good girl." He handed her a check for 10 million naira. "Your mother's surgery must be done immediately," he said. "I don't want you using her as an excuse to run away." Stella's stomach twisted, but she took the check. She had made a deal with the devil. Within a week, Martha's surgery was completed. For the first time in months, her mother opened her eyes without pain. "Stella, my child," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "You saved me." Stella forced a smile, but deep inside, she felt like she had lost herself. The next day, she packed her few belongings and left for Nicholas Cain's mansion. She was now his possession for 2 months, but nothing could prepare her for what happened next. The black SUV pulled up in front of Nicholas Cain's mansion, and Stella's heart pounded in her chest. This is it. There's no turning back now. She clutched her small travel bag tightly as the driver opened the door. Her legs felt heavy, unwilling to move, but she forced herself to step out. The mansion looked even bigger than she remembered, towering over her like a castle. This wasn't her home. She wasn't here because she wanted to be. She was here because she had sold herself for her mother's life. The butler greeted her at the door. "Mr. Cain is expecting you." Stella nodded stiffly, stepping inside. The house was too quiet, too perfect, too cold. Her prison for the next 2 months. Nicholas was sitting in the massive living room, dressed casually for the first time, a white t-shirt and gray sweatpants. He looked less intimidating, but his presence still suffocated the air around her. He glanced at her bags. "You're late." Stella clenched her jaw. It was only 5 minutes past the agreed time. She started, but Nicholas cut her off. "I don't care. Follow me." She trailed behind him as he led her up a spiral staircase and down a long hallway with golden chandeliers and expensive paintings on the walls. Nicholas pushed open a door. "This is your room." Stella blinked in confusion. The room was huge, a king-sized bed, floor-to-ceiling windows, a private bathroom, and even a walk-in closet filled with clothes she didn't own. "Wait. I have my own room." Nicholas scoffed. "What did you expect? That you'd be sleeping in my bed from the first day?" He smirked. "Sorry to disappoint you." Stella's cheeks burned with shame. She had spent days fearing the moment he would demand her body, yet here he was, treating her like an unimportant guest. "Dinner is at 8 p.m., he said. "Don't be late." And with that, he walked away, leaving Stella standing in the middle of her unexpectedly luxurious prison. Days passed. Then weeks. And Nicholas did not touch her. In fact, he barely spoke to her unless he needed something. Instead of demanding intimacy, he treated her like a maid. "Go get me coffee. Polish my shoes. Iron my suit. Restock the wine cabinet." Errands. Endless errands. The only time he interacted with her was when he was yelling at her, whether it was because she put too much sugar in his coffee or because she forgot to turn off a light. Stella couldn't understand. Why was he doing this? She had expected him to claim his payment immediately, to use her the way men like him used desperate women. But he didn't. He ignored her. Completely. Maybe he's playing mind games with me. Maybe he wants me to beg. Maybe he just enjoys watching me suffer. Whatever it was driving her insane. One evening, exactly 1 month after she moved in, Nicholas called her into his study. Stella braced herself for another impossible task, but when she walked in, she found him standing near the window, staring into the night. For the first time, he looked tired. She hesitated. "You asked for me?" Nicholas turned around, his sharp gaze softer than usual. Can you cook? The question caught her off guard. Yes, why? Cook for me. Stella frowned. You have a chef. I want your food. There was something strange in his voice, something that almost sounded like vulnerability. She didn't argue. She simply nodded and walked toward the kitchen. That night, she made jollof rice, the only dish she was truly confident in. When she placed the plate in front of him, she expected him to criticize it, insult her, or throw it away. Instead, Nicholas took a bite. Then another. And another. It's good. Stella's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't smiling, but there was a softness in his eyes that she had never seen before. That night, for the first time, Nicholas sat with her at the dining table and asked about her mother. It was the first real conversation they ever had. After that night, things started changing. Nicholas no longer yelled at her. He no longer sent her on endless errands. Instead, he started talking to her. Some nights, when he came home late from work, he would sit in the living room and tell her about his stressful meetings. Other times, he would just listen as she talked about her mother's progress. One evening, he surprised her with a bag full of beautiful clothes. These are for you, he said casually, placing the bag on the table. Stella stared at the expensive outfits. Why are you giving me this? Nicholas didn't answer. He simply shrugged and walked away. Day by day, the walls around him started to crack. And day by day, Stella's heart started to betray her. Why do I feel like I'm starting to understand him? Why do I feel safe? Why do I feel like I'm falling for him? 2 months later, the morning finally arrived. Stella packed her bags, ready to return home. She found Nicholas sitting in his study, drinking whiskey at 9 a.m. When he saw her, his face darkened. Where are you going? Stella's hands clenched around her bag. The agreement is over. I should go. Nicholas set down his glass and leaned forward. Have I wronged you? No. Then why are you leaving? Stella swallowed the lump in her throat. Because I don't want to be a burden to you. Nicholas's jaw tightened. Then take your mother and move in here permanently. Stella froze. Her heart started beating faster. Why would you do that? Nicholas looked at her for a long time, then stood up and walked toward her. Because you changed something in me, Stella, he said, his voice raw. And I don't know how to let you go. Stella stood frozen, her heart pounding as Nicholas's words echoed in her ears. Because you changed something in me, Stella. And I don't know how to let you go. Her fingers tightened around the handle of her suitcase. This wasn't supposed to happen. Nicholas was supposed to use her, discard her, and let her go once the 2 months were over. But instead, he was asking her to stay. And the worst part? She wanted to. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to unpack her bags, call her mother, and tell her that she and Nicholas, against all odds, had found something real in this cold, unpredictable arrangement. But how could she? Nicholas, her voice broke, and she looked away. I need time to think. Nicholas's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Take all the time you need. But they both knew time wouldn't change the truth. Stella was standing at a crossroads, and no matter which path she chose, someone would get hurt. Nicholas sat in his massive living room, staring blankly at the glass of whiskey in his hand. Another drink. Another night. It had been weeks since Stella left. At first, he had told himself he would be fine. He had lived his whole life alone, never needing anyone. Why should this be any different? But it was different. He had tried to work, but his mind couldn't focus. His once thriving empire was slowly falling apart because he had lost interest in everything. The once powerful businessman, feared and respected, had become a shadow of himself. He stopped attending meetings. He stopped answering calls. Instead, he drowned himself in alcohol, hoping to numb the ache in his chest. But nothing worked, because the pain of losing her was greater than any hangover. Meanwhile, Stella tried to rebuild her life. She told herself she had done the right thing. She had left before things got too complicated. Nicholas was a rich man. She was a poor girl. They came from 2 different worlds. Besides, she still didn't understand his feelings. Was it love or just attachment. So, she convinced herself to forget him. She spent her days taking care of her mother, pretending she was happy. But late at night, when the world was quiet, she would sit by the window, staring at the sky, thinking about him. Thinking about the man who had changed her life in ways she never expected. One afternoon, Stella went to the market to buy vegetables for her mother. As she moved through the crowded stalls, she suddenly noticed two women whispering nearby. She wasn't paying attention at first, until she heard a familiar name. Ever since that girl left Mr. Nicholas's house, he has never been the same. Stella froze. Her heart started pounding. Mr. Nicholas? She stepped closer, pretending to examine a basket of tomatoes while listening. He's been drinking heavily. He barely leaves his house. His workers say he hasn't been to his company in weeks. A man like him? Falling apart because of a girl? It's not just any girl. That one was different. She changed him. Stella's breath caught in her throat. Nicholas was suffering because of her? She had always thought he was too strong, too powerful to be affected by anything. But he was breaking without her. And in that moment she knew it was real. What he felt for her, it wasn't just attachment. It was love. And she loved him too. Without thinking twice, she dropped her basket and ran. Nicholas sat in his dimly lit living room, staring at the empty whiskey bottle in front of him. He had barely eaten. He had barely slept. A loud knock sounded at the gate. He ignored it. Probably the guards handling some delivery. Then another knock. Then another. Finally, his guard rushed into the house, looking excited. "Sir, she's here. Stella is at the gate." Nicholas shot up from his seat. For a moment, he thought he had misheard. Stella? Here? Before he could think, he ran. Ran out of the house. Ran past the shocked guards. And when he reached the gate and saw her standing there in the rain, his heart nearly gave out. She came back. She had chosen him. Stella stood there, breathless, drenched from the rain. And the moment their eyes met, she saw it. The raw emotion. The pain. The longing. He had truly missed her. He truly loved her. Without a word, Nicholas pulled her into his arms, holding her like he would never let go. "I didn't know how to tell you," he whispered against her hair. "Because of how we met. Because of how this all started. But Stella, I love you." Stella's heart swelled. "And when you stayed with me," Nicholas continued, "I realized you were a good girl. A girl who was willing to sacrifice everything for her mother. A girl who didn't deserve the deal I put her through. And I hated myself for it." Stella pulled back slightly, looking into his eyes. "Nicholas," her voice was soft, but filled with emotion. "I love you too." Nicholas let out a shaky breath, as if hearing those words finally set him free. "Then don't ever leave again," he murmured, resting his forehead against hers. "Never," she whispered. And just like that, the walls around their hearts crumbled. Their love only grew stronger. They spent more time together, slowly rebuilding what they had lost. Nicholas started working again, this time with a new purpose. Stella spent her days laughing more, loving more. Then one evening, as they walked through the garden behind Nicholas's mansion, he suddenly stopped. Stella turned to him, confused. "What is it?" Nicholas took a deep breath. Then, with a small smile, he got down on one knee. Stella's heart stopped. He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it, revealing the most beautiful diamond ring she had ever seen. "Stella," he said, his voice full of emotion, "I don't want another day to go by without knowing you are mine. Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Stella's cheeks as she nodded. "Yes." Nicholas slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into the most passionate kiss of their lives. This wasn't a deal. This wasn't an arrangement. This was love. And it was forever. Stella, the poor girl who had once begged for help just to save her mother, was now the wife of a billionaire. But more than that, she had found a love stronger than anything she had ever imagined. The body Nicholas once wanted through a deal, he now owned through true love. And the girl who had lived all her life in poverty was now living in endless wealth. Because in the end, life is unpredictable. And love Love always finds a way. That brings us to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.